This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm Grace Ormsby, and a big topic that sometimes can be a little bit daunting for some, especially when they are considering it in the property investment space, is whether or not it is worth them using a self-managed super fund. And we wanted to make it a little bit more of a clear picture for people to cut through some of the noise out there around SMSFs and what they are and how they can be used in the property investment space for investors, no matter where they are and at what point they are in their journey. And so we put together a little bit of a guide, and it is called Using an SMSF to Invest in Property, a Guide for Novice and Seasoned Investors. And this was sponsored by InvestorKit. It is an absolute pleasure to be chatting with Adrian Lee, Senior Portfolio Strategist over at InvestorKit today. Adrian, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Adrian, SMSFs are a pretty big topic and a pretty big deal. Can you give us some insight into what an SMSF actually is? You guys lent a lot of the expertise for this guide, and for some people out there, it's all well and good to be hearing about SMSFs, but it still doesn't really help to explain to them what it actually is and what it can be used for.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, when it comes to a self-managed super fund, it's essentially just a vehicle where you have your super balance, and it's in a structure where you can have a little bit more control in terms of what you invest in. So you can invest in multiple different asset classes. That could be, property, shares. That can also extend to more, unique investments like art, collectibles, and things like that. So it really just allows you to have a bit more control in terms of what your super is invested in compared to your standard retail and industry fund, where they sort of just pick those shares or assets that you invest in. So yeah, it's a really good opportunity that allows you to invest in property, whether that's residential property or commercial property. And it's also a great environment that allows you to, have the benefits of using a little bit of a bigger balance to maybe get into assets that you might not be able to. It's not overly complicated. There are some additional structures and things involved with having a self-managed super fund, but that's essentially just a vehicle that allows you to invest with your super.
Yeah, so basically every Australian that works really has probably been given at one point a superannuation fund or been asked to supply one to their employer who will pay into that, and that's meant to be that retirement fund. But an SMSF really allows someone to get behind the wheel and say, this is what I want my money to be invested in, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you go to those standard retail or industry funds that most employers will either provide for you or you can kind of select, it's just sort of giving them control to them in terms of what you would want to invest in. Whereas self-managed super fund, the onus is on you to select exactly what you would like to invest in. And that could be property if you wanted to do so.
So it does really speak, Adrian, to being a little bit more of a savvy investor, but it doesn't mean that you need to be really, really, that there is a certain level of financial literacy that does come along with having an SMSF, but it's not like you need to be working in the finance space or an advisor to wrap your head around it and be able to go, okay, this is worthwhile me doing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Look, there are, additional requirements and things that you have to do. It's definitely a bit more complex in terms of the legislative and those requirements of having a self-managed super fund compared to your normal one. But this is why we work with professionals. We have accountants, financial planners, SMSF specialists who are really good, and they cover all of those requirements that we need to cover. And they're the ones who make sure that everything is compliant, that you don't make any breaches. There are these severe penalties if you do sort of make any breaches, but as long as you're working with good professionals, they are the main ones who take care of all of those requirements and things like that. So you don't have to stress too much about all that.
That is definitely a really big key takeaway of not only this guide using an SMSF to invest in property, but also our conversation today. No one can just decide one day that they're going to start an SMSF and build it out themselves without kind of coming under some stricter parameters than necessarily getting their employer to put money towards a super fund. What does the process look like, Adrian, when people come to InvestorKit and they say, yeah, I want to buy an investment property, I want to use an SMSF to do so?
Yeah, so in terms of process, it usually starts with the portfolio reviews or strategy sessions that we have. And that's mainly just to sort of visualize what a property in a self-managed super fund would look like in terms of your overall portfolio. Now, this is just considering your sort of property portfolio, not overall in terms of like financial circumstances and things like that. So once we sort of model that out and see what it kind of looks like from a property point of view, that's when we would refer you on to those professionals, the accountant, the financial planner, the SMSF specialist. They're the ones who would be able to review your actual holistic financial position and just see if it's suitable for the client, advising them of pros and cons. Obviously, we can't give that financial advice. That has to be done with those financial professionals there. From there, if it's suitable for them, that's when they can help you set up their self-managed super fund as probably the next step. We work with the broker to get the pre-approvals and understand how much can we borrow for this potential investment. And then from there, we can go hunting and look for the property.
There you go. Well, you've made it sound really, really straightforward. There's obviously a lot more information contained within this guide. There is a link to it at the bottom of the blurb for this podcast, by the way. The guide is called Using an SMSF to Invest in Property, a guide for novice and seasoned investors. We'll be back in just a moment with more from...
Imagine being rushed to hospital.
Yep.
And your life changing in an instant. Imagine going through hundreds of tests. And 46 weeks of chemo. Now imagine you're a child. That's why Starlight exists. To bring happiness to seriously ill children. Please donate at starlight.org.au.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I am joined by Adrian Lee, Senior Portfolio Strategist at InvestorKit. And Adrian, I'm so glad that we could get you on this podcast because you inherently gave us so many of the insights for this guide, Using an SMSF to Invest in Property, a guide for novice and seasoned investors. There's a lot of pieces of wisdom in there about people who maybe are just starting out, whether they're just starting out their property investment journey full stop, whether they've been doing it for a few years now and are trying to work out what is next, or even for those people who already have an SMSF in the works and they've probably dabbled in a bit of property, making sure that they can get the most out of that SMSF vehicle. And there's, as I said, a lot of pearls of wisdom in there, nuggets of advice. Go check it out if you have not already. There is a link at the bottom of this blurb. But Adrian, what I want to chat with you now, we've already talked a little bit around what needs to be done when you're setting up SMSFs for people and some of the things that people need to be thinking about. And I'm curious, when people do come to you, how many of them want to be using their SMSF? How many of them don't even know what a self-managed super fund is, and how many of them feel comfortable going into that kind of investment vehicle when they do want to be investing in property?
Yeah, so it is a little bit of a mixed bag nowadays. We're definitely getting a lot more inquiry when it comes to self-managed super fund within our business. A lot of people are understanding that they have certain limitations in terms of their portfolio that's, in their name, whether that's limitations on borrowing capacity, equity, or just cash flow, because naturally with the rates and everything being a little bit more expensive, that can get a little bit hard. So a lot of people are coming into the business and going, hey, look, I have my super balance. I know that I can purchase a property in SMSF, and they're ready to go. You've also got the other bunch of people who don't really know about it. They haven't really heard or realized that they could invest in property within their self-managed super fund. So that's when usually it's something we bring up. Obviously, like I said, not financial advice by any means, but usually there are some triggers. If we're seeing that the balance is sort of approaching, let's call it, 175 to 200,000 within a combined balance. So whether, individual or couples generally usually have that balance, then we can sort of start to have those conversations of maybe it's a good time to consider it. In terms of household incomes, it does very much depend on the lenders and how they assess you, but typically around 150 to 180,000 household income. That also is a little bit of a trigger with the balance where we can have those conversations and maybe consider it. So we do bring it up in conversations once we see those triggers, but it depends on whether the client is comfortable with it. Everyone has their own sort of risk tolerance and whether they're happy going a little bit heavier in terms of their portfolio within property. Some people don't want to touch property within their super at all. So it really just depends on the client.
One thing you did bring up just then, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more, and I think is probably one of the coolest aspects of SMSFs, is that you can combine self-managed super funds. Do allow people to pool their resources, essentially, to, instead of it just being seen as an individual retirement balance, a couple can pool their resources together and combine their income and maybe make bigger investment decisions, or family units can even pull their self-managed super together and make bigger investments that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you combine the balances between, like you said, couples, family members, and bring it all together, it does open up different opportunities that you might have to invest in property. In your personal name, you might be, like I said, restricted by certain parameters, whether that's your borrowing capacity, your cash flow, or things like that. Whereas when you pull it together, you might have quite a decently sized deposit, especially if you haven't considered it for a while and it's just been churning away in the background. And that could open you up to, potentially higher price properties, commercial properties, and all of those really good opportunities there too.
Risk profile was something that came up in that guide. I'm going to direct people again to it using an SMSF to invest in property, a guide for novice and seasoned investors. The link is in the blurb here. But Adrian, risk profile, as you mentioned, is going to be different. But let's face it, any investment has an element of risk associated with it. Industry super funds, retail super funds have traditionally been seen as quite safe. Property is also as safe as houses, but there is going to be a varying level of risk to that. But I guess, again, we are not providing financial advice here, but this is all very, very general in nature. But it can come with greater reward. There's a lot of reward that can come with investment in property.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all of these structures and the, complexities of super aside, it isn't too far or too much more complicated in terms of the thesis of why we're investing in property. A lot of people are investing in property because it's a strong, stable investment. It outperforms in the long term. And a lot of people understand and trust property because it is a very tangible asset compared to when they're investing in shares and companies that they might not necessarily be experts in. So all of these elements are still very relevant when we're investing in super. It's getting that sort of outperformance and using leverage to basically beat the returns that you might get from the other investments that your super is investing in.
It is an enticing prospect, Adrian, and it's obviously been tried and tested a lot of times over InvestorKit. You've dealt with multiple customers and clients coming to you saying, yep, okay, we're set up. We've talked to the experts. We know that an SMSF is the way to go for us. It has opened up options. You talk about in the guide how it can improve your ability to access finance and borrowing power too. So, maybe people are stuck in some ways, but then can inherently get more leverage through tapping into the amount of money that is already in their super funds. But I'm sure there are a lot of mistakes that can come with investing in an SMSF as well. And there's no point in telling people that, it is something that they should maybe consider without also assessing what some of those risks are. What do you see as being the biggest mistakes that people do make when it comes to taking out an SMSF and taking on that kind of risk?
Yeah, I think in terms of one mistake is, or maybe the biggest one, is that a lot of people leave it a little bit too late in terms of their life. The reality is that with property, you do get let's call it the bulk share of your return because of leverage as well as compound returns, which means that the more time you give it, usually the better results. It's a lot easier to double your property value in, 20 years rather than 10 years. So the longer time, realistically, the better. So if you are approaching it and you're sitting in, your 20s or 30s or early 40s, you have quite a few market cycles that you can see the benefits of leverage play out and give you that really strong outperformance compared to your other asset classes like shares and things like that. Because property has high transaction costs, you get better returns as you have that more time because it sort of dwindles down in terms of those transaction costs that can be quite expensive, even if you do have those favorable tax advantages in super. I think the other big mistake that we usually see is people thinking that they're being conservative by putting a little bit more cash into the deal rather than using an offset account. The reason why this is a bit of a mistake is because if you are to put more cash into the deal, super's lending is a little bit different where you can't pull out equity and then go on to your next investment, much like what a lot of people do to scale their portfolio in their personal name and things like that. So what you want to do is make sure that you're putting a lower deposit and you'll get the same result using an offset account by not paying as much tax. And if you did want to use that money later on for another investment, or maybe something happens and you need to pay for a repair or a renovation or things like that, that's when you can use that money and save that for later on.
It's a very good point to make. And I think the tax piece is something that we do need to pick up on again after the break. Don't go away. See you very, very soon. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm Grace Ormsby, and it is a pleasure to be joined by Adrian Lee, Senior Portfolio Strategist at InvestorKit. And really, we're unpacking a brand new guide that has just landed on SPI. If you haven't seen it already, it is Using an SMSF to Invest in Property, a guide for novice and seasoned investors. And Adrian, it feels like a very timely point in time to be talking about this topic. I feel like SMSFs, a lot more people now are getting a bit of an idea. There's a lot more people who have access to information on the web from experts are getting the hang of an SMSF and what it can really provide to them. Are you seeing that in your work? Are you seeing more people than ever really look at SMSFs as providing potential for their property investment journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in terms of the inquiry we're getting in from our business, a lot more people are moving and considering self-managed super fund as a really good option because of those limitations. There's no doubt that, with the interest rates increasing, I think a lot of people are feeling a little bit stressed in terms of their personal budget. And yeah, it's just really a great option to maybe get that extra one property that you need to achieve the goals that you want, and also doesn't really restrict you in terms of your personal budget because the money's not coming out of your pocket, so you don't feel it and it's not as painful when you're purchasing this property.
Yeah, it's a good point. And even just the fact that, this is really setting up for retirement. And while a lot of people probably are thinking about retirement as the end goal for why they are investing in property, it's not always, I guess, front of mind. Whereas when you're doing a self-managed super fund, an SMSF, you've got no choice but to be looking at retirement as the end goal of that. And it's a really cool way to be, looking after your own interests and making sure you're setting yourself up for the future, and rather than just leaving it as a passive investment over to the side. And that is really what we wanted to get out of this guide, using an SMSF to invest in property, and provide a little bit more information to people out there who are interested in going on this journey, who maybe already have one and are not sure what the next steps could be to grow that investment portfolio out. And Adrian, we cover a lot of stuff in this guide. We talk through some of the general information about an SMSF. We've touched on some of it here, but really, whether you're at the beginning of the journey or a seasoned investor, to give you the insight and intelligence to ensure you're making smart SMSF decisions. So we've got information in there on just starting out, what you need to know about investing in an SMSF, whether an SMSF vehicle is the right one for you. We then go into what does it cost, and you touched on that a little bit already, around $175,000 to $200,000 being that sweet spot to really take advantage of that and harness that super fund to invest in property. But one thing that we do touch on in this report too, in this guide, is the tax break. And taxes are significantly lower in an SMSF than just generally going out on the street and deciding to buy a property as an investment.
Yeah, they definitely are. And I think that's why a lot more people are considering it in terms of growing their portfolio. There's some really great tax advantages of, within your super, of 15%. And then after 12 months, if you do consider selling it for capital gains, that 15% drops down to 10%. So it can be a really good alternative or consideration when you're purchasing within your self-managed super fund of if you do have a strong cash flow, whether that's from a commercial property or if you are being a little bit more active in buying and selling. Because of that tax break, it can make it a lot more of an attractive offer there.
And it would be amiss of us not to bring up that there are other costs associated with this. People can't just go into an SMSF blindly thinking that everything is going to be discounted. There's not going to be any expenses to consider because you need to deal with professionals here. You're obviously going to have the costs associated with counselling, associated with receiving the services of those professionals. But what are some of those costs that people do need to be taking into account? Because it does become a very serious consideration for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's probably two kind of categories that you could put it into. There's the setup costs as well as the ongoing costs. So setup costs typically vary from $3,000 to about $7,000. And then ongoing costs are between about $2,000 to $5,000. Obviously, it does depend on the type of advice and the complexity of your super as well. But that's generally where we're sort of seeing the cost range between. When it comes to the ongoing costs, usually what we're seeing is once you're hitting those higher balances, it's relatively even when you're looking at the costs of your retail industry funds because they sort of usually charge you on a percentage base. The higher balance you have, the more they charge you. So we're kind of seeing that even out at that point.
So just another thing for people to note there, and people that have had an SMSF for a little while probably know all this and should know all this already, but there's still some interesting advice you've given, Adrian, insights around tax concessions, tax breaks that are there for those savvier investors, and really a checklist is to make sure that you're actually getting the most out of that superannuation balance that you have. Talk us through how the tax breaks can differ depending on whether you're looking at residential or commercial properties to build out that SMSF portfolio.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of the tax, it is, the same in term for the assets. It's just that it gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to take advantage of it. And what I mean by that is commercial is typically known for having really strong cash flow. That's why a lot of people purchase it. It has the growth and it also has that really strong cash flow. But people are wary to purchase it in their personal name because they don't want to pay extra tax and they might already have a very high tax rate. Within super, because you're getting taxed 15% on that, it becomes really attractive where you can get that really strong stream of cash flow and not pay too much tax. Once you also hit your pension phase within your super, so that's typically around 60 once the member has retired, that's when you can really get that tax-free income stream, which is awesome. In terms of residential, this is where we're seeing it become a little bit more attractive for clients who are very aware of the markets that they're investing in, and they're monitoring the data and looking at growth cycles. What this allows you to do is become a bit more active when you're considering buying and selling properties. An old mantra was never sell. And that was because of the fact that transaction costs are very expensive, and transaction costs still are expensive, but you have that beneficial tax break within super where buying and selling does become something that is a lot more profitable within super. Also, given the ability that you can't pull equity out, it's a way that you can quickly speed up and go from 1 to 2 and expand your portfolio within super there too.
Some good points there. If you have not already looked at this guide, you need to go and check it out right now. Using an SMSF to invest in property, a guide for novice and seasoned investors. It is over on the SPI website. There is also a link in the blurb for this podcast. Adrian, thank you so much for sharing your insights for this guide, because there are some amazing nuggets of information in there. It's a lot of guidance, I feel like reassurance as well to people out there that an SMSF might be the way for them to go, obviously pending their own financial circumstances and talking to experts about it. But how can people find out more, Adrian, beyond if they go and read this guide, they go, you know what? there's probably something in there for me. Can they come to you at InvestorKit and then you point them in the right direction to really get the most out of an SMSF opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. They can come to us and we can sort of do a quick review and just see if it's something that they should consider. And then we would refer on to our accountants, financial planners, specialists, just to make sure that their entire financial position is considered and whether it's right for them. And
they're going to be well versed too. The people that you're referring clients out to, they've seen it all before, I'm sure, with all the clients that you've been dealing with. You know, nothing's probably going to come as a surprise to them when you say this person is looking at getting an SMSF. It's a pretty well-worn path now.
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely referred quite a few clients onto them, so they're very well versed in terms of seeing a multitude of situations and scenarios there.
Well, Adrian, again, thank you so much. It's been great to chat with you today to unpack a little bit more behind the guide. As I said, go check it out. The link is just in the blurb to this podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, editor at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. You can also reach out to the team at InvestorKit, who can give you a lot more information on this stuff, but the guide is the perfect starting point to do that. Adrian, I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you again.
Thanks, Grace. You too.
To everyone who is listening along, we hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, editor at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. As always, stay up to date with all the latest on our website. Subscribe to our bulletins if you have not already, and check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Until next time, stay safe and well wherever you're listening from. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property, or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Feeling trapped by rising interest payments? Escape from mortgage prison with expert refinancing assistance from Finny. We have helped hundreds of borrowers break free from higher loan repayments by finding a more suitable loan. Our expert team can quickly assess your situation, and if there's a better lender available, we'll find it fast. Don't delay. Call today. Speak to a Finny mortgage specialist on 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at www.finny.com.au.